The forest was supposed to be silent. It was nearly midnight when Park Ranger Ethan Cole finished checking the last trail in Black Pine National Forest. A cold fog drifted between the towering pines, swallowing everything more than a few yards away. Even the wind had gone quiet. Then he heard it. A child was crying, not the distant howl of an animal, not birds, not the wind pushing through the trees. It was unmistakably the voice of a young child. "Help!" The cry echoed through the darkness. Ethan froze. In 20 years as a park ranger, he had rescued lost hikers, injured campers, and children who had wandered too far from their families. But something about this voice felt different. It wasn't getting louder, it wasn't getting quieter. It was as if the forest itself refused to let him know where it was coming from. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his flashlight, radioed the ranger station, and stepped off the marked trail into the darkness. He believed he was about to rescue a lost child. By sunrise, more than 40 people would search those woods. They would find footprints, broken branches, and signs that someone had definitely been there. But the child whose cries echoed through the forest was never found. Black Pine National Forest stretched for hundreds of square miles, filled with steep ridges, narrow ravines, and dense pine trees that blocked much of the moonlight. Once darkness settled over the forest, even experienced hikers could lose their sense of direction within minutes. For Ethan Cole, however, these woods were as familiar as his own neighborhood. He had spent 2 decades patrolling the park, responding to emergencies in every season. Lost hikers, sudden storms, injured climbers, and wildlife encounters were all part of the job. Experience had taught him to stay calm, trust his instincts, and never ignore a call for help. That night had been uneventful until the fog rolled in. It crept across the trails so quickly that familiar landmarks began disappearing behind a wall of gray. Visibility dropped to only a few yards, and the forest became eerily still. Then the crying came again. This time it lasted longer. It sounded frightened, young, desperate. Ethan immediately stopped walking and listened. The voice seemed to come from somewhere ahead, just beyond the trees. He radioed dispatch. "I may have a lost child somewhere off Ridge Trail. I'm going in to investigate." The dispatcher acknowledged the message, but warned him that the heavy fog was interfering with radio reception. If he lost contact, backup might take longer than usual to reach him. Ethan switched on his high-powered flashlight. The bright beam cut through the mist, revealing nothing but wet branches and towering pine trunks. Then the crying echoed again. Closer. At least that's what it sounded like. Without wasting another second, Ethan left the safety of the trail and followed the voice deeper into the forest. The deeper Ethan walked, the stranger the forest became. The crying continued every few minutes. Each time it sounded close enough to reach within seconds. But whenever Ethan hurried toward it, the voice seemed to drift farther away. He stopped. Silence. Only the soft tapping of rain against pine needles. Then, "Help." The child's voice returned, this time from his left. Ethan turned immediately, sweeping his flashlight across the trees. Nothing. No movement. No footprints. No sign of another person. He called out calmly, "You're not in trouble. I'm a park ranger. Keep talking, and I'll find you." No answer. Only another desperate sob echoing through the darkness. Minutes later, his flashlight revealed the first clue. A tiny, muddy footprint pressed into the soft ground. It looked fresh. Not far away, several low branches had been snapped, as though someone small had pushed through them in a hurry. Hope rushed through Ethan's mind. Someone really had come this way. He followed the trail carefully, discovering more scattered clues. A second small footprint, bent grass, and what looked like the faint outline of a child's hand, smeared with mud, against a moss-covered rock. Everything suggested he was getting closer. Yet the crying remained just out of reach. Every step forward only seemed to pull the mysterious voice deeper into the endless forest. By the time Ethan finally admitted he couldn't locate the child on his own, nearly 3 hours had passed. The fog had grown even thicker. His flashlight beam barely reached the next row of trees. He radioed dispatch again. "I've got evidence someone came through here. Small footprints, broken branches, possible child in distress. Request immediate backup." Within an hour, the quiet forest transformed into a full-scale search operation. More than 40 people arrived before dawn. Park rangers, sheriff's deputies, volunteer rescue teams, search dogs, even drones equipped with thermal cameras flew over the dense canopy as daylight slowly broke through the clouds. The teams spread out in every direction. Every trail was checked. Every ravine was searched. Every stream was followed. The dogs picked up a faint scent near the muddy footprints Ethan had discovered, but only for a short distance. Disappeared. Not faded. Disappeared. As though whoever had walked there had vanished into thin air. The thermal drones detected no human body, no campfire, no abandoned tent, no signs that anyone had spent the night in the forest. The search continued for nearly 12 hours. Nothing. Even stranger, local authorities checked every nearby town. No parents had reported a missing child. No nearby campgrounds were missing a family. No schools had contacted police. No emergency calls matched the description. It was as if the child Ethan had heard had never existed. But one discovery convinced him that someone had been there. Near the edge of a narrow creek, hidden beneath fallen pine needles, investigators uncovered a tiny blue sneaker. It looked old, very old. Yet it showed almost no signs of weather damage. No one could explain why. The blue sneaker was sent for examination. While investigators waited for answers, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the child's voice. Something about it felt familiar. Not the words, the fear. It sounded real. Unable to let the mystery go, Ethan visited the park's small archive building, where decades of ranger reports were stored inside dusty filing cabinets. Most of the files described routine patrols and rescue missions. Then one faded report caught his attention. It had been written 27 years earlier. The report described another ranger who had heard a young child crying near the exact same section of Ridge Trail. Search teams had responded. They found nothing. Weeks later, another report appeared. Then another. Different rangers, different years. Always the same location. Always the same desperate cries. Rescue. Near the back of one folder, Ethan found a yellowed newspaper clipping. It described a family who had disappeared while hiking in Black Pine National Forest decades ago. The parents were eventually found after becoming lost during a severe storm. But according to the article, their 6-year-old daughter was never recovered. Despite months of searching, no trace of her had ever been found. Ethan stared at the faded photograph. The little girl was wearing blue sneakers, just like the one discovered beside the creek. Most people would have accepted the mystery and moved on. Ethan couldn't. 3 nights later, he returned to Ridge Trail alone. No search team, no drones, no cameras, only his flashlight, his radio, and the hope that he might finally discover the truth. The forest welcomed him with complete silence. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Then, a child's voice floated through the trees. "Help!" Ethan's heart pounded. The voice came from somewhere ahead. He followed without hesitation. The crying continued. Always close, always just beyond the next group of trees. He pushed deeper into the fog than he had ever gone before. Suddenly, the trees opened into a small clearing. Moonlight broke through the clouds. In the center stood an old wooden swing hanging from a massive oak tree. It moved slowly, back and forth, although there was no wind. The crying stopped. Ethan searched every inch of the clearing. No footprints, no child, nothing. Then his radio crackled to life. A voice from dispatch asked, "Ethan, who were you talking to?" Confused, he answered, "I haven't said a word." The dispatcher paused. "We heard you speaking to a little girl for the last 5 minutes." The transmission ended in silence. The official investigation was eventually closed. The blue sneaker couldn't be linked to any active missing person case. The old reports remained unexplained. No evidence ever proved that a child had been in the forest that night. Ethan continued working as a park ranger, but he never patrolled Ridge Trail alone again. Years later, new rangers quietly shared similar stories. Some claimed they heard crying deep in the woods. Others reported seeing a small figure disappear into the fog before they could get close. No photographs, no recordings, no answers. Today, Ridge Trail is still open to visitors. Most hikers pass through without noticing anything unusual. But experienced rangers have one unwritten rule. If you hear a child crying somewhere beyond the trees after dark, stop, listen, and no matter how real it sounds, don't follow the voice.